We want to welcome you back to episode 2 with Curtis Grimm. Just dive in deeper about what it is that has really been foundational in him building a successful career.
Somebody once said, like, you don't want to be the tallest tree in the forest.
Right.
If you are, you need to move to a different forest.
Right.
Right. And there's moments in the different things that I've done where I just know, like, if I would have been sitting even somewhere else in a cubicle by someone different, I wouldn't have been as successful as I was.
Right.
Right. Like you hang around other people who are maybe where you're wanting to go. Yep. Maybe even as a dad or a husband or whatever it is. Right. You try your best to spend more time with those folks. Right. And kind of through osmosis, you just lift your level, your rises.
One thing that's happened to me a few times, and I know I have done it as well when I was younger, but I've had young guys reach out to me already and say, hey, can I have 30 minutes of your time? And they'll sit down and they'll, it seems it happens several times a year anymore. And most times they'll have good questions. It usually turns into an hour instead of 30 minutes over coffee. Or it might just be a phone call or a Teams meeting, but they're well prepared and they'll always conclude and go, thank you so much for your time. I know I was, they appreciate it. They say, we can't afford to pay you, but we'll be back when we can, that type of thing. And it's just, I just state that, find those mentors in your life that'll give you some time to maybe just help you get your direction sorted out.
Kind of brings me back to what you said earlier when you were betting on yourself. And you said, listen, if I can help these people around me, I'm not worried about my family. I'm not worried about myself. It's that rising tide raises all ships. Mm-hmm. So you take care of the ones around you and you yourself will be taken care of. So. Yeah.
And that's, having gone through that philosophical change myself, I don't know how to help someone get there. And I don't exactly have a moment or a change in thought of like how it happened, but maybe it's age, maybe it's kids. I just don't know. But man, once it does, it's all this, just everything becomes available. It's really
the options are limitless. Yeah. I think one thing that's changed tremendously, if you grew up in the 80s to today, one big change is simply there's a lot of support out there, even if you have to pay for it, but money's easier to come by than it was back then. So there's ways to make that work through coaching and different things like that. That's one thing I see change with it, but do what it takes. Invest in books, podcasts, whatever it takes. You invest in yourself, it will come back completely.
So what has been the biggest struggle for you so far in starting your own business and managing the growth of it? What's been your biggest struggle?
Yeah. Understanding and being comfortable that like, you don't know everything, because I don't, and I'm not even close to knowing everything. Right. And what kind of comes along with that is that you have to trust other people. And I think that that's really hard for people to do. It's hard for me, and I have a remote team, right? Which kind of makes it even harder, because they're not sitting at a desk with me every day and I'm watching what they're doing or making sure stuff is even getting done, right? So, I think that trust, and then the other thing is finding the right people, to go back about like your circle. If you got people on your team who believe, for me, it's really this service aspect of what I do. And if you got people on your team that like live there with you, you're kind of just going the same direction with them all the time. Right. And that's what's going to get them out of bed in the morning is they want to help people. Yeah. I think that's really good. So I would say finding a team and then having trust, or two of the biggest things that I find myself, I struggle with. And at the same point, like I do have a group of people who feel, at least I feel like I do. You can be proven wrong, but I feel like I have a group of people that feel the same way I do.
Yeah.
And so that's nice. And that makes it easier to trust them. Right.
So you brought up 2 points there that I think hold a lot of either small business owners back, or it stops them completely from starting. And one is they don't know it all. And that's a personality trait. Some people want to make sure they know every step of how everything's going to happen before they dive in. And it locks them down in a lot of places in life. That's one thing you brought up. And then the other one is there's a lot of small business owners you talk about that you have to trust other people. And I see a lot of people that they own a business, but it's really they own a job. And they're just in that wheel because they don't trust anybody and they will never expand. And so they really, after 20, 30 years, will be money ahead if they'd not owned that business because they're not trusting anyone else and they're not really running a business. They're just running a job. So can you touch on those 2 points a little bit? Because you just mentioned that.
I guess I'll kind of fire it back to you a little bit. Like, do you think that is, business owners, in your opinion, are afraid to like relinquish the power or authority?
There's a couple things that I see happen with that. One, they believe they can do it better than anyone else. They don't understand the aspect of training and putting checks and balances in place. And then they have no way to follow up and see how that person is doing it. Mm-hmm. I would imagine what you've experienced is the same thing I've experienced, and that is simply that once we let go of certain things, there are people that can do a lot of things that I do much better.
Yeah.
And yet I'm the one who's sitting there refusing to let them do it. And Heather has done this more than once. She's like, just let me do this. Like, knock it off. And then it's like, wow, that was really nice to get rid of that. That off, get it off my desk because I didn't really enjoy it. I just knew I had a standard, and yet the next person could take it higher. But I think it comes down to that I see more than anything is it's a lack of trust or lack of training. And their biggest excuse 100% of the time, over and over, they don't have time to train somebody else.
Yeah.
It's easier to do it myself.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that's very arrogant, because they believe they're more important than anybody else they're working with. And if you own a business and you're not focused on other people and serving others, you cannot successfully grow a business.
Yeah.
I believe, and I would imagine, I'm curious to see what your take is on this. I believe that every client that I work with, my goal is to make them more successful and better than I am. Mm-hmm. That's my goal with all of them. I tell them that, I work to that end. And if I am only going to provide a service to get them to a certain level, and I've seen it over and over in business where employees, and you've experienced this, that's why you left.
Yeah.
But you'll hit a level and they're going to put a lid on you and cap you right there because they don't want you to take their job. And they know what your potential is. It happens so many times.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can't, those could have been bad things, right? Like I left 2 good jobs.
Right.
To eventually end up here. And it wasn't just like a straight arrow.
No.
It's a lot of valleys and a lot of peaks, and there's a lot of heartache in between.
Yep.
But one thing I thought of when you were talking was like, my son is 5,
right,
and he's starting to read. Right. And so of course it would be easier and faster for me to read the pages.
Right.
Uh-huh.
But if I want him to learn how to read,
right,
I gotta invest the time and take the time with him at a book, listening to him sound out every letter, try to figure out how to say words, right? And I don't know if that helps people compartmentalize this in business, but yes, you're trying to teach an employee how to do your job so that you don't have to do the job for them every single time.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah. And you think about it, it's simple like that, and it's your kid. So of course you understand it better.
Right.
But that's what kind of came to my mind because I'm living that right now. And then I think it's really interesting to me is, I guess what I would try to encourage people is whatever you don't like about what you do every day, you should try to find someone else to do it.
Absolutely.
Because that thing that you don't enjoy doing will consume you. You'll put it off. You'll procrastinate. You'll do it late at night. Like QuickBooks.
Right.
I hate QuickBooks. I don't have the brain to do QuickBooks and balance and reconcile and, and my wife gives me a lot of crap for it. And eventually I'm just like, holy Curtis, what are you doing?
Right.
Someone else should be doing this for you
Right.
who likes doing it.
Right.
And
They're out there.
Yeah, you'll have to pay them, but think of all the extra brain power and time that I give myself by just letting someone else do it.
I've heard a statement made, and I was meeting with a guy, and we were kind of talking about possibly working together. And I knew he'd work with somebody else. And he said, well, my problem is, and I thought this is going to be good. You're only as good as your greatest weakness. And I was like, can you explain that to me a little bit? And he goes, well, I've been working with this guy and he tells me that I'm only as good as my greatest weakness. And here's my weakness. And he said, this is what I struggle with. And this is what's dragging me down and keeping my company from growing. And I said, I think your biggest problem is that you're trying to improve your weakness.
Yeah.
I said, if you work really hard, you might become at a 5 out of a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being excellent. I said, why don't you pick the top 2 things?
That's so good.
And tune those in to where they're 10s?
Yes.
Get rid of that. I said, the best you're going to ever do is be average if you focus on your weakness.
Yep.
Ignore the weakness, focus on your strengths,
Yes.
and it'll
be
life-changing.
You won't be able to excel anywhere
No.
else if you're spending your time
No.
on what you're worst at.
Right. And so that's a lot of times it's just focus. It's how a business owner focuses on that.
Yeah. And I think as people, we tend to focus on the problem.
Yeah.
Right. And that
Yes.
that's where we send all of our energy.
Right.
And that's tough too. Cause I work from home, especially people work from home, because as soon as you lock onto that bad idea, that sucker's hard to get rid of.
Right.
And you're sitting there alone, at your desk, no one to talk to, no one to be like, hey, like, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm feeling, until your wife comes home or your husband comes home or
Right.
your significant other. And then you just dump it on them. Right. But yeah, I think that's great. And I myself still need to work on that. Is like, I'm doing things I don't enjoy doing and I'm not very good at still. And I need to just unpack that and give it to someone else.
No, and it's something that's a lifetime of learning. I know that's been something in the last 2 years that I've changed a lot in my life, especially the last 12 months. I would say 23 was a huge year. It's very interesting. For some reason, I see my odd years are always my growth years and my even years. And I don't know why. It's like it's always like this cycle, and it's been that way. I made some of the hardest decisions, of getting out of selling a business I'd been in 25 years and felt like I was successful in my own right. But I would tell any small business owner this: you've got to clearly understand what your purpose and your mission in life is. And you've got to define that before you set goals. And once you know where that's at, you can hone in on that. And it doesn't mean you have to do just one thing by any means, but I knew what I had to get rid of in order to be fully successful. And, it does kind of shake you a little in the aspect that, here we are with all this security. I'm going to let that go.
Yep.
And I'm just believing that
Trust
it's going to be
someone else.
better.
Yeah.
And the process will take care of itself. But I'm going to throw a curve at you a little bit. Nothing we had pre-planned. And you brought up, saying prayers with your kids. So I know you're a spiritual person, but I don't know if you put any thought into this, but what is your thought about the whole idea of manifesting your results or your life?
So I love it. My wife's going to laugh when we talk about this, because I'm a big believer of speaking it into reality.
Okay.
And I practice that a lot.
Right.
And I don't spend a lot of time like in meditation or,
no, that's fine.
or things like that. But the more I tell someone something's going to happen, it just becomes true.
Right.
Right. And kind of the way I'm wired a little bit is like, I don't see any other way for it not to be true. So, so this has to become true. Right. I think that's huge. And I don't, my wife really is like the only person I talk to about that often. Right. And I'll tell her like, this is where I'm going. This is what I'm doing. This is what I see. And if I can visualize it and then like get her approval and then tell my mom and then tell my dad, then tell my buddies, then tell my circle, then it's like, oh, here it is.
You're raising the stakes on it needing to
I have to do it now. I've told too many people.
I think it's funny that you went there with your line of questioning, because in my head, when you were saying, well, I don't know why it is, but it seems that every odd year is my good year. And
so
it's like, because you put it out there.
When he was saying that, I was going to tell him, you should just think every year's your good year.
Yeah.
Right.
Be surprised at what.
And it's been funny because
Yep.
it's been a little bit of a joke between Heather and I that, and I shouldn't say is a bad year. It was a transition year.
Right.
You know, that's like last year was a transition year. I sold off business. There's just a lot of that transition going on. And I don't know that but it's just a cycle of some of that. You're exactly right about that. But we can go back and find, anything from Henry Ford to you name it, guys that created a lot of things that were successful. They will talk, a lot of those, Einstein, they talk about you have to envision what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And earlier we talked about the negativity and focus. You talked about focusing on the problem instead of the solution. And if we can focus our attention on solutions, it's life-changing. I mean, you can go back to stories, I'm sure, and say, I focused on the problem and this is what happened.
Yep. Yeah.
It got worse.
I think even for people who aren't entrepreneurs, this is a very big thing, and it's really hard to do.
Relationships, especially.
Yeah. It's really hard to be able to look at yourself and be like, what can I do differently to change what's happening? Instead of focusing on, maybe how someone's talking to you, or maybe how this happened, or if the cop wouldn't have pulled you over today. Mm-hmm. You can sit here and think about all that stuff. It ain't gonna do you any good. Right. I use the word ain't. That is not very common. But it's not going to do you any good. Right. My perspective is you're going to be miserable. Right. Thinking about this. Right. So what can we do different? Right. Next time, let's get up on time, or let's leave the house on time. So we're not speeding. You can blame the cop if you want, but you're speeding because of something you did, most likely.
Fear and anxiety will take us down really bad roads. And the thing that I have learned for myself, I just want to share this to those listening. If you are late, there's no reason to let your heart start to race and put all those thoughts through your mind that, okay, now this, you will just go down a laundry list real quick that we are behind on the rest of the day. Mm-hmm. And then you get to 5 o'clock and you just ran behind and it was an awful day. Or you can just take a deep breath and go, all right, I'm going to have to either adjust one meeting, make one emergency phone call, and I'll be back on track. Or I'm just going to have to let everybody know I'm running late today. Yeah. And then you can shorten some gaps up, and pretty soon by the end of the day, you've got everything done you need.
So this kind of happened yesterday, but I think one thing that's in there is the truth. Right. Right. People are most often understanding if you're honest. Right. And if you tell the truth, then whatever scenario you're playing out in your mind just is kind of irrelevant. So, and I'll bring this up as a story yesterday. My developer has his own thing, and he's always had his own side gig, right? And he had a very bad day in his business on Friday. And we were supposed to set a website live early this week. And I was freaking out because I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to tell these people. I don't want to put more pressure on him. Mm-hmm. Because that's not really fair, right? And so I decided yesterday, I'm just going to call my client and I'm going to tell him what happened. And I'm going to say, we could use some grace right now. Yeah. And all the bad stuff I was telling myself, right? I go down there, I call him, he answers, I tell him what's going on. And he's like, we're not in a huge hurry, Curtis. He's like, we don't need this thing right now. He's like, if we can get it live next week, that would be fine. And it just was wow, I'm feeling all this anxiety. And if I just tell the truth, mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't know what's going to happen, but at least you're honest. And I think that's huge for people, right? Whether you're in business or your personal life, tell the truth. They're not always going to be happy.
So let's take that one step further. Up to that point that you talked to the client, decided you're going to tell the client the truth, were you telling yourself the truth? You were telling yourself all the bullshit you thought was going to be true.
Yes.
And that's the biggest problem, I think. One of the biggest problems people have that take them into this anxious, stressful day is we tell the shit we tell ourselves that's not true.
Yep.
The hypotheticals and everything that we think is going to happen is usually what destroys, our entire day like that.
Yeah.
And for you, and I'm not trying to pick on you here, but you gave us this example.
Yeah.
I want to challenge people, tell yourself the truth. Because we talk to ourselves in a way that we would never talk to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
In our own mind, we will, I don't even want to use the words that I've used in the past. Now, the last number of years, I've cut those out. If I catch myself doing it, I've got a process to go through to change my thought patterns and my thinking, and it doesn't really come up anymore. But a lot of years, it was awful how I talked to myself.
Yeah.
So I just challenge people with that. I think the first person you really need to tell the truth to is yourself.
Yeah.
Separately, I'm Gage.
And I'm Bontrager.
Together, we are Gage Bontrager Consulting.
We work on changing your mindset,
Developing leaders,
building systems and processes
helping you grow personally and professionally
to achieve the success that you want personally and professionally.
however you choose to define success for you.
Reach out to us and follow us on social media or look us up on the website, and that will put you on a path to achieve what is missing in your life.
Thanks for watching this episode of Mindset Growth Podcast.
And the biggest thing, too, I think it's such human nature to go to worst case scenario in every situation. And like Curtis just said, generally when we go to, the client, the boss, whoever it may be, it's never really that bad.
It's not.
No. There's a solution to every problem. We're wired, our minds are wired to protect ourselves. And so we tap out early in our capacity, and it's all about protection.
I'd be interested in, it doesn't need to be right now, but your process on that. I use music.
Yes.
And I don't know if that's just a weird thing like in my brain, but if I see myself going down this way, I have like a handful of songs, 15, 20 songs that I know like will reset me and put me back into like the way I want to think. Right. Sometimes I can catch it on my own, but if you're real deep, you need something to shake you loose.
There's a few.
Yeah.
That I turn to.
Yeah. Music.
Mm-hmm,
yeah.
Music wise.
There's a couple of things. Music is good, but all you're doing is pushing that problem down the road. And I'm not knocking it for either one of you, but in order to change those patterns and habits, you have to replace them. And I can go into stories myself, but the first thing I challenge everybody to do is when you start to have those negative thoughts, go back and ask yourself why. And if you can take just even a few minutes, grab a notepad and write down what triggered me, because you've got to figure out what the trigger point is that caused you to go down this negative pinpoint. At that point, once you narrow that down, and you can do this at a later date, and it might be better to do it later, as you kind of then can fire up some music and come back and start to visit this, but then go back
with different emotions,
with a different perspective of it. Go back and go, what happened 10, 20 years ago in my childhood that causes that situation to trigger me? And so when you recognize this is what my trigger point is, now when you feel that trigger point, let's set something in place to replace it. And for an example, for myself, and I'm giving that's a very brief process, but I think it's beneficial because nothing against music. You want to snap out of that. You want to stay out of that. But when certain things happen in our life that we experience pain, every time and we don't understand it, but our mind's picking up that there's this emotion, this adrenaline is coming, and it takes us back into a panic at that point. So for example, and I don't know why I did it. I was a runner, and then when I got older, I switched to biking, but I would get on that bike and it would take me just no time, and I've got a whole playlist I love to listen to. But as soon as I start to exert myself, I thought about every person that ever screwed me over, in my opinion. And I mean, it would go through, and it just in my head, I could be just like, I need to tell them this, I need to tell them that. And I'd go for an hour, hour and a half. By the time I was finished, I felt good because I had my workout and my body went through its exercise, and I had processed it all in my mind. But what was unhealthy was 2 days later, I got on that bike and the same thing happened, and the next week and the next week. So what I started to do is when those things started to happen, once I broke down those triggers, when I feel those triggers coming, I would sit down and start to go through everything in my life that was wonderful, that I was grateful for. And I would just take like each child and go, here are 3 things I really appreciate about them. And then go to the next one. And first thing I knew, an hour had passed. I'm listening to music. I forgot to even be grateful anymore. I'm just enjoying it. I had a good time. And now I can get into a workout, and that's not even really coming up. But that's just an example of a process. As long as we don't replace or recognize what's happening, we're going to always go back and fight that. And one of mine personally was trusting other people. I felt very abandoned young, and through a certain experience that happened as a teenager that kind of was ongoing. And when I would exert myself, there were trigger points of when those things happened was always when I was, would trigger that. So for me, that's worked really well. There are probably other people that study neuroscience and other things like that probably can give you more detailed, but that's just a brief overview of what I've done.
Yeah. And really it is like, do whatever you have to do.
Yes.
And, long-term solution or short-term solution for me, and maybe you, Heather, when I can get that music, it just reframes.
Right.
When I come back, right, it just, I'm in a different spot, and I'm looking at things instead of as a problem, I'm looking at them more as an opportunity. And that dichotomy between the two, like a problem is an opportunity.
Right.
Almost always.
Yeah.
Really, I think. And, music helps me just get back to that spot.
And I'm not downplaying it. I would just say, though, take a minute and recognize where it comes from. Often what it is the rejection or our thought that we're not good enough. And that's total crap.
Just giving me anxiety.
It's driving us up. And it's just, we're all good enough.
Yeah.
It's just a matter how we.
That is a very, very deep way of looking at it. I'm going to go more surface here.
Okay.
Sometimes there's just people that can really piss you off too. Like they are having a terrible day. And you can look at it that way. Yeah. Like their problem is now becoming our problem. So sometimes it is something as simple as music to remind you like, okay, I just need to calm down a little bit. Let their problem be their problem, not my problem, and move on with my day. So sometimes it's not always that deep.
Right. But I will tell you, people don't upset me anymore like they once did. I can now talk through it without my heart racing, my breath getting shallow.
And it's not because
and a lot of that comes with maturity. I know that.
And it's because I've worked on a lot of those things because we are wired to protect. So even when people upset us and we think a situation arises, though, I know I'm going deep with it. And you're right. There are short triggers, but those people, even if they move out of our life, somebody else is going to move into that position.
Oh, yeah.
If we don't get to the bottom of that.
Right. So let's get back to...
Sure. Yeah. Got a little off track there.
Yeah. You mentioned something a while back in our conversation about how your team is actually remote. So there's so many of us that are working in that arena now. And I know it didn't all come from COVID, but I know a lot of it started there. Kind Can you talk about, some of the challenges that you have gone through going through COVID and having to be more digital and your presence be more?
Yeah. So I co-owned another business and we were about year 3 or so when COVID kind of started, right?
Yeah.
And immediately everything I had done was I would drive out and see people, right? And right away, no one wanted to see me anymore because, I had COVID.
Yeah.
And my wife was a nurse, she was pregnant. So we were being very protective of everyone else too, right? But right away, it was like, hey, we have to, this thing we've done successfully for 3 years no longer works. So we have to shift our business to, allow us to still grow and hit the goals and do all the things that we want to do. So, you lean into technology, you lean into Zoom, Google Meet, you start utilizing all these tools. And the hardest part of that for me, I'm very much an extrovert. I really love people. I love seeing people. I love hanging out. And that was gone. Right. And so that was the hardest part for me. And I think in terms of business though, that I kind of see it as good and bad a little bit, but I think the good part was that people realize that, the talent pool that you can get access to isn't just in your backyard.
Yes.
Right.
Like you now have the ability, and today it's still true, to hire someone from anywhere. Right. And COVID kind of broadened that perspective a little bit. At the same time, you go back to trust and you go back to all these things because they're real. And when you're used to having this person sit right beside you every day, and now, they're 15 minutes away or 20 minutes away or states away, and you don't know what they're doing. So really, I think it was good. And then I think it was bad because it caused a lot of leaders, in my opinion, to really micromanage a lot of stuff that drives people nuts, right? Like you kind of want some autonomy. You want some trust, and if you're not getting that from your leader, it makes it hard every day to wake up and get started. So I think it was good and bad, but I do think small business and leaders are catching up with it now. They're much more capable of handling those differences of, having someone in the building every day.
I think a couple things have happened. It's helped with some efficiencies, without a doubt, just with less brick and mortar and depending on the business model. It's given flexibility to where some people that maybe do want to work from home, you can acquire talent at a lower cost.
Yeah.
Because there are some benefits there. And then there's also become ways to track production that are very effective. So,
yeah.
Pause.
Okay.
Need to pause there.
I was going to say, because we're about to the end,
I
and
need
we're
to
at an
see if
hour,
we
I think,
have-
anyway.
We're a little over an hour, and I need to see if we've got.
Because I was going to just do a
Brad
wrap
Beal.
up.
Yeah.
I didn't realize we were over an hour already.
Yeah, you asked some good questions coming back.
Well, sorry. You said I could.
Yes, you did, for sure.
Okay. He has not gotten
Responded.
back to me, so I don't think we have one in 15 minutes. If we did, we
Okay,
really
right.
need to.
Well, we could go a little bit farther. I don't know. What do you think? Split it in two and go with about 2 30-minute ones, I think, because of
There's
what we're
some
getting
good stuff
into.
in there.
I have an 11:30.
have
You
an
do?
11.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's
So we
wrap
need
it
to
up.
So
wrap it
we
up.
got
Let's wrap it up.
15 minutes.
Yep.
So
You're free to ask another question if you need to.
yeah,
I can
we'll
shorten
wrap
my
it up
answer.
then. Okay.
I talk a lot. Sorry.
No, I think
No,
there's
it's good.
great stuff in there.
Did you have a question you wanted to ask or no?
No, I
Okay.
don't think so. You can go
Well,
with,
Curtis,
sorry, you can go with,
Yeah, I'll
where
wrap
do you
it up.
find them? And yeah.
Curtis, one thing that is apparent is that you're not afraid to take a risk and step out and really, go into something that you believe in. That's this last hour, we've heard that. What attributes, is that just a personality trait? Because you grew up in a family that was a lot more consistent. Your dad worked the same job and things like that. What do you attribute that to? And what would you recommend for somebody who is feeling uneasy, they feel like they've got a business that they want to start or they want to maybe expand, but it's that unknown. What is something that you've experienced that would help them in overcoming that?
So I'll go a little deeper first, and then I'll come back to like where I think it comes from. But my grandpa, for me, was huge in my life. When I was, I don't know, from like 5 to 9, every day in the summer, I would go to work with him, and he managed multiple grain elevators throughout his adult life. And I got to see just a whole different approach, right, from my dad.
Right.
And just get to see a person doing something different, supporting their family, right, managing people, going through all of those things that come with that. And so my grandpa was huge. And I would say that if I was with my grandpa too long, I'd just be lazy. But, so I think for me, it was interesting to be with someone who worked so hard like my father and then get to go spend so much time with my grandpa.
Right.
Because they're very different. Right. And then, the other thing is like, things don't happen by accident.
Right.
And if you're doing something and you're successful at it, you can replicate that many, many, many times over. And so, and sometimes I say like hard work creates good karma, and that's even kind of baloney in my mind a little bit, but I kind of believe it. But really, if you're doing something and you enjoy it and you're successful at it, stay in that lane. Mm-hmm. Like I sold long distance phone service. I sold office supplies, and then I went and sold marketing, and now I'm in marketing, but really what I'm doing is helping people. Mm-hmm. Like that's
You're serving others.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. And
action creates action. It just does. Mm-hmm. You've got to be activity. Sorry, I cut you off.
That's all right. No, I'd say that's it for me, is like, I realized that whether, this person needs long distance phone service or they're trying to get toilet paper at a lower price, I enjoyed helping them do that.
Right.
And just accomplishing the goals that they're trying to do. And so that's just kind of where I've been for 20 years.
Yeah.
Not quite 18 years, 17 years.
Heather, there's a couple of points that I've picked up on. And one, the very first one is how important family is in somebody's life. And I know we all come from different backgrounds. We have different experiences, and not always does a person have the privilege maybe of having a grandparent and parents like Curtis has had, or like, we all have different scenarios. There, people pass, sometimes relationships break up, things like that, but it's very impactful. So if there's anything I'd challenge the audience with is leverage those relationships in your family and lean on those as much as you can. What was one of your takeaways?
We're going to cut this part out because
on the spot.
I know, he does this all the time. What are my takeaways? One of my biggest takeaways was just him believing in himself, because sometimes you don't have those outside sources. Sometimes you do, but the belief in yourself, knowing that you can do this, maybe it's not the right circumstances around you, but you're going to create those right circumstances. I think that was pretty big for me.
And another one for me is face those fears, understand where they come from. And by facing them, you're really understanding what your abilities are and the successes you've had in the past, and build off of those and let those carry you. And I would say the fourth one out of this, we cannot miss for sure, is the inner circle.
Yeah.
It's your circle of
definitely.
friends. It is vitally important for anybody who wants to be successful in life. And this is not being self-employed, just life in general. You want a happy, complete, fulfilled life. You need a solid inner circle, and you need to have people that will believe in you, trust you, and push you to be a better person. We most often do not see the potential we have. We need others to encourage us to develop that. and use it to serve others. I would say even the final and fifth, if we would real quick, is know our purpose.
There you go.
Once we know our purpose, the rest of it starts to come real easy. Yep. Thank you for joining Heather and I on another episode of Mindset Growth Podcast. We hope you have enjoyed it.